and still sharing a little bit, we can dive in a bit, Jess. This is so exciting because it's been in the
Mhm.
pipeline for a little while. Um,
Mhm.
so we wanted to kind of get started, Jess, with sharing a bit of an intention, and then we'll dive in a little bit to your work and your book and all those exciting things. So Jess, Marie, and I are going to verbally share an intention, and then we invite you all to share an intention for this hour and a half we have together in the chat. So, Jess, I don't know if you want to lead and go first.
Yeah, so some of you I have had the pleasure of facilitating learning, so this is not a new practice. For those of you who I have not yet, setting an intention is a way to, of course, be intentional about our space and time. And I do this with my own kiddos as well, too, 13 and 11, although I do get eye roll. But really, the question is just, how do you want to feel at the end of this hour and a half? And don't overthink it, whatever first comes to mind. But if this is a new practice for you, that might be a gentle way for you to pause and reflect. Um, the intention that I have for myself today is actually the very intention that you, Becky, have helped me set for this book launch, which is love. So my intention today is love.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Beautiful. So Jess's intention is love. Feel free to just like slowly take your time and share yours in the chat. When I was reflecting, Jess, you threw me then with a feeling. I was like, okay, I'll add a feeling.
Yes.
But I was wanting to be open and I wanted to link that with being open-minded, open to possibilities, open to impact, open to new ideas. And when I'm open and open-minded, I feel expansive. So that will be my word for feeling. And I know I already feel expansive, and I know I will by the end of this call. So, Marie, would you like to share one?
I, oh, I can see some beautiful words in the chat already. Inspiration, curiosity, all the words that were bubbling up for me. But I think right at the get-go when we were discussing beforehand, I want to be present. I want to be truly present through the whole session today. So number one, I can nurture people in the chat, and number two, I can just learn, continue to learn and connect. So thank you for the invitation today to co-host Becky and Jess. I'm excited. Thank you.
What a dream team. And yeah, like you said, so many lovely things, inspired, confident. That's a lovely one. Because of course, when we know our pedagogy, we feel confident in what we're doing. Um, More learning inspired, authentic learning, yes. Love all of them.
Mhm.
Playful job, yes. Full of possibility. Ah, I love educators, like just beautiful. So should we dive in, Jess?
Let's dive in. Yes, where shall we start, Becky?
Let's start with the start. So the thinking behind your book, how that kind of bubbled up, what your hopes are for the book, and kind of how that came into fruition. And I wish I had my copy here, but I know mine's going to be back in England when I'm back in England. There we go. There's the copy.
Yeah.
So if you haven't got that already, that's the book to get. That's what we're talking about today. But yeah, just a bit of background of your thinking of creating your wonderful book.
Yeah, so I am a learner-centered educator, and I know most of us are if we embody an inquiry-based approach to teaching and learning or leadership, if you will. And so really my learners, you all, in this call and beyond this space are really who and what guided me to create this publication. I wrote a little bit about learning walls, although I don't know if I dubbed it as such in my first publication. And then I started sharing honestly a lot here on social media, and people asked questions. And when I was doing some different type of partnership work, got lots of opportunities to coach individuals on building learning walls. I was, of course, sharing my own on Instagram actively as I was kind of tinkering and creating. And really, I couldn't ignore the questions. And that's honestly what a good educator does, right? Is they don't ignore the questions and curiosities from their learners. And I thought this was going to be a very thin book, Becky. When I talked about it with my brother, he's my younger brother of 2 years, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to write this book. It's going to be really easy. I think I'll just like put it together. At that point, I had the How to Build a Learning Wall sketch note that my amazing illustrator Ryan Bear put together for me, and I was utilizing that with schools and school districts. And what I thought was going to be a really teeny tiny book is actually humongous and huge and almost 400 pages, which I cannot believe that it's this long. I started actually writing it when I was in Sydney, and was at a cafe near Bondi Beach. It will be a really embedded moment for me, and yeah, just started putting pen to paper or fingers to keypad, if you will, to put it together, and just really asked more educators about their practice and tried some things on for size, of course, myself. And the How to Build a Learning Wall sketch note is a big bulk of the center of the text, if you will. But then it's flanked on two bookends with, the why behind learning walls. So kind of like digging in a little bit to the pedagogy, what it is, what it's not. That's a really big question I got is, okay, what is it not? Or what are the things that I need to have, right? We love teachers a checklist so we can make sure we're ticking all of our boxes. And then the back end of the book is t over 20 amazing educators. Some may be in this call right now, who talked about their own process of building a learning wall, sharing, the failure forwards, if you will, or the thinking behind their thinking and the artifacts that were displayed there. So really, it's just been this amazing journey over the last, gosh, 2 years, I'd say probably now, to be able to put together what some of you already have on your bookshelves.
Thanks, Jess. It's so nice to hear the process. And
Mhm.
you put like you couldn't ignore the questions. I was like, you would be a really good inquiry practitioner if you ignored questions. I'd be like,
Mhm.
that's a no-no.
Mhm.
But Mike shared in the chat, first words in chapter 1, follow your learners. So that's what you're modeling, it's like listening to what people need and what they're doing. And
Mhm.
um, just really kind of linking to your first book as well, because I didn't really introduce myself in the beginning. I get so used to doing calls when I'm like, everybody actually knows who I am, but everyone in this call is not going to know who I am. So the link that Jess and I have is that we met what 2 years ago, Jess, at the Chapters Kaleidoscope of Inquiry conference.
I believe so. Yes, yep. You
Yeah.
came to one of my sessions. It was the first time. Trevor McKenzie said, "You need to go meet Becky." And I think he shoved me towards you or said, go to her. I was like, "Hi." And I just fumbled forward and got to connect with you because he just raved about you so much. And so yeah, that was our first meeting. Yep.
Right. And I just love, looking back at that even because we've had many calls since and you've done so much fantastic work with Learning Pioneers. So that's my background. And our link is that I run a learning community called Learning Pioneers. And Jess has come and inspired us several times, and we've read your first book, Jess, and that is our most loved book in Learning Pioneers. It's the one that our mastermind members who've been with us for ages, we've read so many books, and they're like, that's the one that's made the biggest difference to my leadership practice because it's so clear, so implementable. Same with this book. You have just a real skill of just stripping back all of the noise and simplifying things, so like you said, a 2 year process in doing that, but when things are that clear, they're just so doable. um so just linking a little bit to the kind of why and the impact of your latest book, Evidence of Inquiry. If people are embedding those ideas and they're kind of following through the process of the book, what's your kind of
Mhm.
desired impact? Like, what's your why behind that? And how do you hope that'll impact on educators?
I think in all of my work, I want an inquiry-based approach to leading and teaching and learning to feel approachable. I know that inquiry can feel really ambiguous. We know, those of you who are really farther along in your process, in your practice, the impact that it has on you, and also too, you maybe have forgotten how confusing it was when you first got there. My first step into inquiry was actually at an IB school. I was a fifth grade PYP teacher and heard all these amazing things, and none of it made sense. And there's a lot of language within the IB as well, too, that kind of muddied it up for me. And so I'd say like my work now, and then this book as well, too, I wanted people to feel like it's accessible, they could go try something and see an impact. And it's not that I want that like kind of dopamine hit of like, yes, I did it, but I want that, yes, I did it and it's making a difference. So I'd say like the accessibility is really important to me as well as just slowing down the transaction of learning. And you've heard me say that. Those are not my words, but I just really love the idea and think we need to slow down. The world is moving very quickly and very fast, and how might we shift our habits and practices in order to slow down to take care of ourselves, to better meet the needs of our learners, and really just say no to the things that are honestly just a waste of time and to do things a little bit differently. So, I've had an amazing leader who I wrote about and dedicated part of my first book to. Her name is Dorian Marvel, and she once said that the barrier is the way, and that has stuck with me ever since. And I knew that that documentation practice can feel really heavy. And when everybody says data, they're like, oh, that's terrible. But now when I think about data, I think about questions and I think about rich artifacts and evidence and following, the documentation or the things that we create alongside our learners and how that creates such a different space and opportunity for deeper and more meaningful learning.
Thanks, Jess. Oh my goodness, I've got so much I could pick up from that. Just
This
the
is why you're you, Becky. You're amazing.
it's like ding, ding, ding.
Mhm,
The slowing down piece.
mhm.
So it's going to take me a few steps to explain what I mean by this. But
Yeah.
so we've just interviewed in Learning Pioneers, we've just looked at enabling conversations with Neil Mercer, James Nottingham, and Ron Ritchhart.
Mhm,
And actually, this is part of the intention of any coming together like this and any kind of connection, especially across the world. You might get connected with new ideas and new speakers and new ways of thinking. So in England, there's a big movement for oracy, for developing oracy, and it's a real strength. It's really kind of taken off. And Neil Mercer, Professor Neil Mercer, is at the heart of that. So his focus is on developing oracy. Um, and he's very well researched on that. And he's got this neat little phrase that we first heard from Guy Claxton the very first time I interviewed him for Learning Pioneers. And it's interthinking. So the idea of interthinking is like this is interthinking. One person shares an idea, another does, another does, another does. And before you know it, you've got a new idea. It's a way of creative thinking. And we were then discussing, and so that I've told you it's a long story to get to a point. So there's another educator called Hal Roberts, who I'd highly recommend looking up to. And he looks at using storytelling as a mantle of the expert as a driver to learning. And then we were realizing that you could kind of interthink whilst you told stories. And then this kind of expanded into how many different ways could you interthink and what would that look like? And what does that look like in inquiry? What does interthinking look like in play, in a role play or wherever? So, 100 different ways you could interthink. So let's transfer that to slowing down. How many different ways can we slow down? And I've
mhm,
never fully thought about and Guy talks about like a stealth approach to education. So coming at things sideways sometimes. So if we're slowing down, if we value slowing down, and I'm pretty sure everyone on the call resonated with that. And even you saying that, I felt my kind of, my nervous system relax. Like, yeah, I want to slow down.
mhm,
If we value that, how many different ways are we just tweaking our practice or what we do to show and embody and live that value of slowing down? So
mhm,
learning walls is such a brilliant way because um, it's visible. It's right there. You can't miss it, and
mhm,
it forces us to slow down. So we
mhm,
might say we want to slow down, but the curriculum and the school day and everything, and then before we know it, got to the end of the day and we haven't slowed down. So it's a
mhm,
way to anchor that slowing down.
mhm.
Um,
Yeah, essential and needed.
yeah, yeah. There was something else you said about the why behind learning walls. I was like, I've never thought of it like that. Um,
Mhm,
Because when I was looking at why learning walls, I put it into my friend ChatGPT and it came up with a really good, like really
mhm,
solid list, that was
mhm,
like, oh my goodness,
mhm,
why would you not do this? Um,
mhm,
so actually that's the kind of, the flip side of that question. What are the
mhm.
blocks? What do you see people saying when they're not developing a learning wall? What are the kind of yeah buts that you see?
Oh goodness. The yeah buts I see, time, which is kind of we all, fall back to that. I don't have the time to go do that. Yeah, but I don't have space. Um, yeah, but I have curriculum to teach. Um, yeah, but I don't have the supplies, the materials. Yeah, but um, I feel like those are the ones I hear probably the most, although I feel like when I talk to a yeah, but, and I playfully always talk about them a whole lot more. Yes, our district doesn't have the time. We have to do this instead of that, right? It's, a lot of the time it's and the mindset of it has to be either this or that. When it's not either or, it's both and more. And it's not more on our plate. It's just more fulfilling. It's more meaningful. It's more engaging. And so it's just shifting, how we use our time. We all have the same hours in a day, but how we mindfully choose to use those hours makes all the difference. And so, I attempt to, I think pretty successfully, in the book, lift some of those up in the first couple of chapters, talking about what are the tenets of a learning wall, listing those and then boldly saying, what are they not? And that was actually from a nudge from a colleague and educator who said, Jess, you got to say what it's not. And that was really scary for me because I'm like, oh gosh, this is going to be in print. And pe what if people say no? What if people disagree and they put something somewhere? And, just sitting with it a little bit longer, I was like, no, this is the way that it is. This is what it is, and this is what it's not. And I just need to lean into that and say that. I think one of the ones recently that's kind of gotten the big like, oh my goodness, is a wonder wall is not a learning wall. And that's a big like shocker because I think a lot of us have probably tinkered with wonder walls, and I love a wonder wall. And also, a wonder wall is one noted, and how we use a wonder wall typically doesn't necessarily have all of the tenets of a learning wall. So that was a really hard one for me, Becky, to have to say what it was not. And I kind of actually love like doing the mic drop with this now. Now I'm like bold and I'm like, no, I'm going to say what it's not, and let's get better together, right? Let's shift some thinking and get playful here. So, yeah, I'd say, we can definitely dive into some of the pitfalls if you'd love me for me to share my slides, or if you want to pause on that one, I can do that as well too. So, those are the first things that come to mind for me.
Yeah, we'll dive into the slides in a second, but I can't help
Sure.
but pick up on all the things you said at the
All
start of the
good.
chat as well. So just kind of starting from the first thing I saw, Carl has shared, slowing down gives time for reflection, and reflecting is how we learn. I can't help but share one of my favorite educational quotes there, which was shared with a Project Zero live in my other learning community press play that looks at taking play all through primary. And we're not sure whether it's John Dewey or not. Somebody said it was John Dewey and somebody said it's not. So I don't know, we're on the fence, but it's a good quote anyway. We don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience.
Mhm.
It's really powerful,
Yes.
we can't keep doing and hoping that stuff, drops in. We've got to take
Mhm.
that moment, several moments, a lot of moments to reflect and think, what does this mean for us? And how have I
Mhm.
changed?
Mhm.
Which again is where kind of thinking routines come in and are really powerful. And yeah, and there's loads of yeah buts there in the chat,
Mhm.
and my answer to so many, our answer to that is get your book, because then we won't have the yeah buts, because we'll jump through them and we'll smash through those blocks. So yeah, go
Yes.
ahead. We'd love to see your slides.
Yeah, so let's start with should we start with the pitfall since that's where we're at? Although I had planned it a little bit reverse, but let's start with the pitfalls, I'd say.
Yeah.
So opposite of how I coach. I'm always the the strengths-based approach. Okay, everyone can see my screen. Okay. Okay. So three common pitfalls for learning walls. I'd say the first one is not planning opportunities for your learners to engage with learning walls. This is a huge one. This year, I've been doing a lot of work with some schools in Shanghai, some middle schools rather. And that's kind of been a big like challenge for them is how do I get my kids to the world learning wall? I'm like, well, have we planned with it? Oh no, I forgot about that. Or, well, I told them to go look at it. Yes, is using a window because that's the space that he had, and also a traditional bulletin board, if you will. Now, what I love here is that with backwards design or UBD, if you will, thinking what he wanted his students to do at the very end was to write an essay. utilizing the characters and a little bit of character analysis. So that was a summative assessment, if you will. So the learning wall supported that summative assessment and formative assessment along the way, or collecting of some rich data and evidence along the way, inadvertently supported the students in that final essay because they had some figurative language in one of those grids over there. There was some really amazing topic sentences and some details that they pulled out of some of their literature discussions. And then really just asking the students or inviting the students, if you're working on your topic sentence today, I want you to go take a look at our character walls and go maybe borrow some of the language. So that was baked into his lesson design. And then, of course, if students aren't doing that, that's where we lean in and we do a little bit of conferring and coaching, or ask our learners to come up to the wall with us to take a peek and notice what's there, what are some observations and connections, right? So I love that that backwards design there was baked into how and why these walls were used here. One thing to think about, and I'll show one more before I pause and then get, questions that you have or from the group. This one belongs to an amazing educator who's here in this call, Tanya. Her learning wall, you can see one on the left-hand side is a learning wall outside in the bush. So just taking a piece of tag board. I think this was after, Tanya, when I had a session with you. You went and dug into your closet, and you found this, and you you got to work straight away. You could see a wheelbarrow there that has some materials. Obviously, her young learners were outside interacting and engaging with it. And then this same learning wall also is brought back inside. Has some similar artifacts, although some look a little bit different. So clearly a lot of intentionality. And yes, I did know you were going to be here, Tanya, so I wanted to highlight and celebrate you. So
Thank you.
the intentionality that you do around utilizing learning walls, and I know this is not your only one. You actually have a physical wall that you use as well too. But that planning for those opportunities so that way your students know that they can. If this is not something that we've had in our practice, then of course our students are not going to know the routine around the routine of using the wall, or they're going to think that the walls are ours and not are theirs, and not even something that we use to support our learning, and it's more of a showcase. So I'd say pitfall number one is not planning opportunities for our learners to use the wall. Are you ready for pitfall two, or should I pause?
I'm going to say we pause because we're talking about
Okay.
slowing down.
Okay, yeah. What
So
bubbles up for you? Yeah, curious.
the first thing I wanted to lift up one thing, and then I want to hand over to people in the call to ask questions, because that would be, I was going to mention as well, share in the chat if any questions come up as we go, because we're hoping to, we
Mhm.
will make time. We will make time to make sure that there's time for questions being asked. So if there's anything bubbling up, sharing in the chat now, and maybe we can get some people to unmute and share their questions. But the
Mhm.
key thing that I was noticing, and I meant to lift up before, was teacher mindset. And I
Mhm.
generally find in an inquiry educator kind of culture or group that the teacher mindset is full of that inquiry practice. What we want to see in our students, inquiry practitioners tend to embody for themselves almost kind of naturally, but we can always lift it up more. But that level of like curiosity and what Tanya's modeling there, it's like, I can do that. I'm going to try that now. I'm going to find something in
Mhm.
the cupboard. Let's go.
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
and I just love
Mhm.
that positive attitude, that can-do attitude. I'm going to make this work because I know it's going to
Mhm.
be great for my students. So I just
Mhm.
wanted to lift that up. Does
Mhm.
anyone have any
Awesome.
questions? Nothing's dropped in the chat here. Um, we'll just, again, I'm very happy to slow down and sit in silence. So let's give it 30 seconds in case something bubbles up.
Yes, have I got that right? I've got pitfall number one, not planning opportunities for our learners to share and be involved. Yeah. Did I
Those
get that
are,
right?
yeah, yes, close enough. That sounds great. Yep. Okay. I feel like they're on their edge of their seats. Okay, you said there's three. You just told me one. Uh, okay.
Let's keep going then, and let's see if
Okay.
something else bubbles up.
Sorry, did not mean to stop my share. Just give me 1 second. Oops. Give me 1 second. I exited out of it by accident. Give me 1 second. Dancing around here. Okay. So pitfall number two is, and this seems obvious, but really This is a big one sometimes as it relates to the yeah, but is inaccessible or out of the way. Now, I'm not showing you the non-examples on purpose because I don't want also to like highlight friends and educators who are just doing their best and maybe didn't think about these things. So I'm showing you the examples, but nesting it under a pitfall, if you will. This might seem like an obvious one, but really when I do learning walks or I engage with schools, whether we do like a whole day or sometimes we'll go on a curiosity walk and walk through the halls, this is a huge thing that I see in regards to students being able to access the wall. I've been into some amazing classrooms, but for primary students, and then the learning wall is tucked up next to the ceiling. And I think in the intention was I want them to be able to see it. And I said, yes, and how might your learners also connect with it or touch it or move the materials, right? And again, it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with things above. I know, Becky, in your 360 classroom, you have some fantastic learning walls that your learners can't physically touch, but your photos that you have on there are very big. And the words that you have there or the steps that guide students through their process are very clear. But there's that accessibility or ways in which that students can use the wall. This is a particular high school teacher who didn't actually have her own classroom space. She shared, she was in three different classrooms. This was actually a library, and the librarian here was like, nope, you may not leave up your learning wall. So she's like, yeah, but Jess, I can't do that. My librarian said no. And of course, I said, well, yes, and how might we? So we literally just took a piece of butcher paper. She took a piece of butcher paper and pinned it up to the wall. So that way her learners, like you said, could access that space. She could have easily put it on the floor if she was not even allowed to use the wall, or maybe the walls are all made out of brick and you can't paste anything up on the wall. What's really nice this as well too is that she was able to roll this up and throw it into, her bag or her closet and use it across classes. So she taught English in three different sections, three different spaces. And so she used this to support the learning for each of the classes. And then I'll share one more. This belongs to I think she's a grade 5 teacher. She's at an IB school. And this was really simple. She realized that when we were doing some work, I did a session for her school and some support work with some smaller PLCs. They had a bunch of stuff pushed up against the wall because they were trying to make more space for students to work, when really it just kind of ended up being too many desks and not enough space for students to be able to move around and utilize the wall. This photo here is actually not mine. It was so funny because she sent me a WhatsApp message and she's like, oh my gosh, guess what? And I was like, okay, what happened? And she's like, it worked. I said, what worked? What worked? And she's like, it happened. I said, what happened? I'm like, oh my gosh, Karen, you're killing me here. And what happened was this. And she was so excited. She couldn't get all the words out. It just came out. And she sent me this photo of her students utilizing the wall actually without her nudging. So I think that was also why she was really excited, but just kind of noticed too, she has a question continuum. Everything has push pins. So again, just nudging learners to be able to move and access those materials. You can see some pockets that she has there that have some items that students can grab and use whenever they need it as well too. So accessibility in regards to getting to the space. And then I also like to think about the materials that we're using to attach things to the wall. Do they tell our students no? If we have staples in 4 corners, I'm not going to touch that thing. Like that's off limits, right? So even being mindful and thinking about how we're attaching things to the wall or to vertical spaces or whatever you end up utilizing for a learning wall, how does that invite and provide accessibility to all of our learners as well?
Brilliant. Right. So much on that too. So there's a buzz in the chat with Berg was sharing an idea. I'm going to read it out loud. She said, I love this. I've been using long IKEA paper rolls as a library learning wall, which we roll out on the floor.
Love
So
it.
it's like, that's that what if thinking. It's not like,
Mhm.
oh, we can't do it because we don't have the space. It's like, oh no, we're going to do it and we're going to find a
Mhm.
way to make the space work.
Mhm.
And then I think it would so many comments in the chat. I'm trying to thread back. But yeah, here we go. Burner, turning yeah buts into yes, and how might we, which was the phrase you were using.
Yes. Yeah.
But I'm going to
Yeah.
link that to a Ron Ritchhart quote that you might know. Another one of my favorite educational quotes. I love quotes.
Mhm.
Here's a second one. So he says, if we want to change the narrative for education, we need to shift from yeah, but to what if, which is just so
Mhm.
neat. So it's that recognizing in ourselves where because inevitably we yeah, but sometimes, because we're under a lot of pressure, but
Mhm.
noticing that, being aware enough to hear ourselves, yeah, butting and just digging into that a little bit.
Mhm.
Um, and I love what you were saying about the messages the learning wall sends, because that kind of links to, I talk about this a lot in terms of making mistakes. Like we profess to wanting students to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes, yet subconsciously, when we went to school, we were taught that mistakes are bad. So we're working against this kind of push-pull of wanting to create that, but having had experiences that don't value that. Um,
Mhm.
so I'm just thinking that's a really interesting take to look at a learning wall and think, does this actually really invite students to join in? Or sometimes am I a bit like controlling and a bit like, oh, don't put that there, but that, which we could be because we want it to kind of be clear. But that could be a really nice way to involve another adult or the
Mhm.
students, Does this look
Mhm.
inviting? Do you think the students will understand that they can add to this? And
Mhm. Mhm.
kind of to get that other perspective. Um, yeah. I wonder if anyone's got any questions in the chat um, or comments. Lift anything up, Jess, as well, if there's anything you see. Yeah, so Megan said, I think classroom walls can show who owns the classroom space and
Mhm.
how much
Mhm.
student voice is present. So
Mhm.
it's like it's reflecting
Mhm.
our values. If we value
Mhm.
agency, the wall,
Mhm.
the classroom, and the
Mhm.
furniture and everything in the room, um,
Mhm. Mhm.
ideally should reflect that.
Yeah, and I think, there's a lot of educators who I work with, and we talk about this documentation practice, and it's, sentences will begin with, well, I just couldn't do that, or that's just too messy for me, right? And it's like, it's messy for you, and also like, how about your learners? Do they need things this way, right? And so I get it, and there's no judgment there, and also that tells me a lot too of like where their mindset is, or what do they need in order to be a learner, right? And so just like how do we like gently nudge those educators who are not in that space? So I have a few ideas when we get to the essentials that might help some of you who are here have colleagues who might give you those yeah, but of this is too messy. I can't do this. This actually particular educator here, they were very mindful of how many things were up on the walls in general. So that was a really big conversation that we had when I was facilitating this session, and that was a concern of some of the teachers is too much cognitive like overload, if you will. So then we just talked about, well, what are you putting up and why are you putting up and what are you hoping your learners to retrieve, which is one of the steps of building a learning wall anyway, is what do you want your students to, learn and understand for the long term. And so then we have to get, very, very reflective and even interrogative about our own practice of, well, what is most important here? And so there's also another sketch note too that I'll share with you in a moment that helps us edit and kind of maybe stream our walls when they become too heavy. And that's okay. That's my learning walls get really heavy and messy too. And that's when we're like, okay, if it's too much, overstimulated, let's pause. Let's reorient ourselves. And that process in itself is, gosh, such higher order thinking there and reflective for both ourselves and for our students.
It's like Marie Kondo. Marie Kondo, you're learning. That's actually the biggest challenge we find in Learning Pioneers because, as you know, we've been
Mhm,
documenting our learning journeys
mhm,
digitally, and it's
mhm,
so challenging to strip back and think about what the essential things are because everything feels
mhm.
essential because
Yes.
every single comment, input, idea
Yeah.
actually adds to the richness of the learning. Um, there's a
Mhm,
really good question in here from Job that I think we will come back to in the essentials. He said, "What steps are helpful to have in place?" And then, this is singing to my heart. He says, "What like dispositions in the environment?" So that would be really interesting when we go into the
mhm,
essentials.
mhm,
How do we lift up and broaden, deepen, strengthen,
mhm,
highlight learning dispositions as
mhm.
part of our learning wall? Um,
Yeah, that's great.
Berg says it gives us an opportunity to really reevaluate what we put up in our classrooms.
Mhm,
Um, Berg once asked her students which displays it actually used and was
Mhm.
quite surprised by the responses. I'd be
Mhm.
interested to hear that. Yeah,
No, I love that. I
yeah.
love that, Becky, actually. I did that with a grade 4 teacher. It was her first year of doing learning walls, and we were reflecting on the year and talking about what did she want to let go of, what did she want to do more of, what were potential goals and growth opportunities for herself. And I said, you've got to ask your kids. And she's like, what do you mean? And then I said, just go give them some sticky notes. I think we like gave them like two different colors. And I said, have them identify what are the areas around the room that were most helpful for them as a learner and which ones could really kind of meh about. The kids thought it was like hysterical about being meh since it was like inside out. And then the students just jotted down a few ideas or some kind of a little bit more of a reflection. And then when she was able to step back and look around her room, she saw the voices of her learners. Of course, now they're different when she had a new batch of learners, but it was just a really good way for her to step back and listen to her learners and see, what were the trends, what were things should she hold on to? Were they aligning or are they misaligned with what she thought was most important too?
Yeah, conversation's getting really good now. It continues in the chat. What a brilliant group of educate. I'll make sure the chat's shared when I share this because
Good,
often that's
good,
some of the richest learning too. But
good.
that's also making me think about the yeah butting and the kind of that won't work in this context type stuff. That the um, thinking about the difference between primary and high school or secondary classrooms. And
Mhm,
sometimes when I've looked at learning environment stuff, high school, secondary teachers will say, yeah, but that's okay in primary because you've got one classroom and we move around and
mhm,
which I do understand 100%. It's a totally
mhm.
different context.
Yeah.
And what if actually that was the greatest opportunity, like an abundance mindset, right? And that
Mhm,
was actually the spark of inspiration for learning pioneers, Pat, who was a close friend of mine in Bangkok, Patna, where that 360 was taken. Um,
mhm,
she was a primary French teacher, so it meant that she had, similar to secondary teachers, lots of students coming in and out of her classroom. She was so creative with what she did instead,
mhm,
stuff that
mhm,
you couldn't do in primary. So she got
mhm,
it's teaching each other through videos,
mhm,
each other French through videos, which he then put on as a QR code on the wall for the year grade below so that they could learn from older students. You can't
mhm,
do that in a primary classroom. That's amazing,
mhm,
So
mhm,
instead of kind of being, yeah, but I can't do it in the way you do, but what if I
mhm,
could do something more creative and unique and kind of better that you can't do in primary? So
mhm, mhm,
it's switching what seems like a deficit to actually an expansive opportunity. Oh, that was one of
mhm.
my intentions, being expansive. Um,
Ding.
yeah. Um, anything else on that? There's so much in the chat. I can't keep up with all of it, but keep sharing because yeah.
Are you ready for pitfall number 3 then?
Yeah. But first of all, I just
Okay.
want to share Berg's pushback,
Mhm.
which I just love. Berg's so good
Oh,
at
tell
being
me
inventive.
more.
He said to me, I wonder if you could do that in primary, Becky. So I love that.
Taste of your own medicine.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Bring it on. I love it. Right. Over to you.
Excellent. Okay. I'd say, pitfall number 3 is that learning walls or our displays are static. And I'd say that's another really huge indicator of whether it's a display of learning or it's a learning wall. And so a few things to share with you here about, rethinking how we're utilizing those spaces. And again, as I'm even saying that, I think of some educators are like, yeah, but Jess, I don't have time and I don't want to do more. And so I'd say, yes, and how might this better help you, align your curriculum and support that? So we'll get into some of those essentials in a moment, but this is a sketch note from the publication as well. And this was actually just something that I was playfully shared on Instagram and got a lot of really great feedback of, oh, these are great questions. I'm going to go use those when I go plan with my team. And I didn't realize these are just like things I do in my mind as I'm like working or collaborating or kind of putting something together. Or those of you who've seen my Instagram, kind of like videos or the time lapse one, these are kind of the questions that are buzzing in my mind. So really, it's just a 5-minute learning wall edit and asking ourselves these questions. And I do really say put on a timer, limit yourself. So just like you were saying, Becky, we we think that everything is important, and actually it's not, right? Like we probably remember such a small percentage of it. And so I love having this constraint of time. And if you need to make it 10, because 5 feels very anxiety driving, like do what you need to adjust to your own learning style. But looking at the evidence, right, and pulling up a chair and asking ourselves, where have we come from? What have we done so far? What are the artifacts and evidence telling me? Where are we going next, right? And how might I utilize the artifacts there? If not, turf it. There's a really amazing time lapse actually in the publication that shows a learning wall that has a bunch of stuff. And it did take us more than 5 minutes, probably maybe 15 or 20 if I'm honest. And we were slowing down, and actually there was a lot of other people in the room watching us edit her learning wall, so I was giving a lot of space for some comments as well too. But there's a time lapse in there that shows the before and the after of what happened when we use similar questions such as these. And also I used the How to Build a Learning Wall sketch note and walked through some of the steps on there. And she was easily able to turf this. She's like, I don't even know why I have this. Or, oh, I thought I was supposed to put all the things up there for transdisciplinary connections. And so we put stuff in file for 13 or the recycle bin, sent stuff home. Um, and then, asked ourselves that last question is, what might help us? What are some additional artifacts or learning experience that we could potentially gather and utilize to help us get to our end goal, whatever our curriculum is or the standard is, if you will. So I love this 5-minute learning wall editor, this little bit of a checklist that we could do by ourselves. We could do it with a critical friend and thought partner. That's kind of always my favorite extra essential of a learning wall if you have one, to be able to help us not have these static spaces. And then really sometimes even the first question, I've asked some educators this and they're like, oh gosh, I haven't even thought about this. So sometimes even the question itself one question might take a substantial amount of time if we've not thought about artifacting process in this way.
Yeah.
I've one, oh, sorry, go
Sorry.
ahead.
Yes. No, no, no. You keep going. Keep going.
Okay, I just want to share one more thing before we kind of pause here in regards to learning walls are not static and just giving a list of those of you here watching the recording. Here's some artifacts and evidence that you could decide, right? That's kind of like another yeah about, well, how am I supposed to do this? Or I don't know what to put there. Do I just grab everything? So just giving you a little bit of a list to potentially pull from or choose from. What are some of your student reflections, whether it be a thinking routine or a quick post-it at the very end of a lesson. Of course, provocation are hopefully that Velcro of learning or things that are riddled throughout our walls. I love a good learning wall that has some success criteria so students can self-assess. I know again in that 360 classroom, which Marie, I do want to drop into the chat. So once I stop sharing my screen, I'll give it to you so we can put into the chat. But I love like that self-assessment so that way students can have some really meaningful dialogue. And so I've seen some teachers do start a learning wall just with that, and it's a writing learning wall focused on that. Of course, it's a co-constructed rubric and some really rich language that is co-designed with the class together as well too. That fourth one that you see there, student questions, yes, Wonderwall. Also, teacher questions. Get yourself asking questions and engaging in that process so your learners see that you're learning alongside them and you're not just waiting to receive all this evidence. The anchor charts, get rid of the ones that are photocopied. You know where those come from. We don't need those. But also, I have some teachers who print stuff off and then they throw it on the wall. But it's how they use those anchor charts and how they use that pre-printed material makes all of the difference. So even in the publication, you'll see some learning walls that at first glance, you're like, "Ugh, that looks like it's from Pinterest," or oh gosh, that looks like they bought that off some teacher store. Okay, yes, and go read some more because how they used it is different. I love photos for our young learners and also our older learners. I think it's a really amazing universal support. So if you have students who are emergent bilinguals, right? Or if you have students who are newer to your classroom, what a really easy way to invite them to that space as well too. Um, Tanya in Tanya's learning wall, you saw that she had a photo. You probably didn't know what it was. I know it well because I speak to it so often. But she had a photocopy of a book that they were reading and a couple of books that they were reading. I've also seen teachers literally take the whole book and just like pin it to the wall as well too. And then of course that academic vocabulary. How can we highlight that and use it mindfully and intentionally? So then our learners have some language to be able to chew on and use, and we're asking them to, turn and talk and share with a partner, just like turn and say, here might be some language that you might want to use as you're talking, or here's some sentence stems to be able to give your partner some feedback. So a little bit of a list, if you will, but of course, there's so many other things that are not here, but something to get us going or get you going in regards to not having a static learning wall.
It's so useful and clear again. And I was thinking with the 5 minute wall check, we kind of say, oh, there's not enough time and we're rushing through, but 5 minutes is nothing to just feel, when you strip back like that, you feel that clarity, you feel that kind of, and if we feel that, the students will too. I was linking it a bit to executive functioning. We that was our inquiry in September. We looked at how to develop executive functioning skills. And just like it's not something I fully focused on before, and it really grounded for me how important it was to focus on.
Mhm.
In the learning power approach, it's the first design principle, making the classroom a safe and interesting place to learn. And part of that safety is clarity and routine. And that, and that's what this is bringing. It's like, this is our learning. It's really clear. It's really stripped back. It's not over kind of fussy, which could really just throw some children that they'd
Mhm.
find it hard to connect with or engage on, on that. I know you've
Mhm.
talked about having like a key and having, kind of we've looked at having like color coded post-its and that kind of thing. Could you speak to that a little bit more? Like, I guess bringing clarity to a learning wall.
Yeah, there's another resource that we'll share with you as well, both here in the chat or it'll be in your email. But in the publication, although it's in black and white, which it's still to me, there's so much here. I know that you don't see the color. And myself, I've tinkered with the color as well too. So that way students can see or our learners can see, in order. What does that mean? What does that look like and sound like? So, oh gosh, how funny. I just opened up to it and I didn't even mean to. This is so funny. If you have the book, it's on page 57. This is a learning wall that I built in our school hallway. We were trying to infuse a sense of community and action taking. And I don't think anybody can see it this far away, but when I started the learning wall, it was just kind of very bare and I didn't really have a whole lot of sequence. And I knew that if I myself weren't really understanding like where did I want to go, and this is also normal as you're building a learning wall to like kind of be confused and not really sure. But then as I started building the learning wall, my academic vocabulary or the organizations that we were connecting with, I used sentence strips that were orange, let's say. And then I had some essential questions that I wanted to pique the community's interest in students as they were engaging with this wall. So I had yellow sentence strips that were the essential questions. Um, and so that way also too, if you think about like the cognitive kind of overload, it helps make some meaning in the brain, if you will, of, what's happening, what does this look like and sound like. But I also don't want that to be the yeah, but. If you don't have the color coded for the academic vocabulary and the essential questions, who cares? Just do something else. Don't let that be the thing. And also, too, if you have access to materials like that, I will show you a virtual learning wall that is utilizing like color and systems in that way. So you could use symbols, which, of course, if you have students who are not reading yet, they can follow that. There's a early years educator in this publication as well. Her name is Lindsay Hoffhines. I share her learning wall about the concept of movement. Okay, this is literally magic, Becky. Every time I flip it over, it's the right one. And she uses numbers. She just has 1, 2, 3, 4 because she knows that her students are learning to count and find sequence. So I'd say like those can be also some like easy entry points to be able to begin to have some organization as well too.
Love it. And the
Mhm.
chat is alight at the moment. There's so
Mhm.
much coming in there and lovely. Like Marie made the suggestion of people sharing their current learning wall. So
Oh
there's
my
like,
gosh.
isn't that gorgeous? We
That's Marie,
dive in
this
and
is
have a little look.
amazing.
Um,
Yes, this is
but a few
amazing.
things that whilst you're doing that, Jess, and whilst you're kind of connecting with those, there's a few things there that are occurring to me too. Like I'm loving Louisa's shared one with paper chains in it. And I'm thinking, okay, one thing is the simplicity and the stripping back and the clarity. And another thing is having the basics. But if there were paper chains on the learning wall in my classroom and I was a learner, I'd be all over it, So there's kind of certain things perhaps that can draw in attention or show a bit of novelty that would kind of hook students in more or would just draw somebody to that learning wall. So that's another fun thing to think about. There's a book I've read called How to Think Like Leonardo da Vinci by Michael Gelb. I don't know if anyone else has read that. Great book for creativity. But one thing he suggests in there is to write 100 lists. When you have an
Mhm.
idea, write down 100 ways you could do it. And I'm thinking of basically 100 lists that we could have in here, but 100 different ways to, make your learning wall engaging or to draw in students.
Mhm. Mhm.
But yeah, have a look, see
These
if
are
there's anything
great.
that jumps out to you.
Yes, I'm sneak peeking at these photos. That was genius. And as I'm doing that, I'm also going to throw in your 360 classroom as well. So I definitely encourage you all to take a peek at that one. It has some really amazing features in there, videos. You can look at those after the recording from today. Let me see.
While you're doing that, Louise has given us an explanation of the paper chains, Becky, cause and effect chains. They were. How does one thing affect something else? How beautiful.
Mhm.
And that one was an example of how does do our sustainability choices change the world around us. That's
That's great.
gold. Thank you,
That's
Louisa.
great. That's great. Yes, thank you so much. Rosanna, yeah, this is a question. So you were asking about specialists, more integrated learning walls. Um, and I definitely a couple suggestions here. I know that the IB asks us to be able to have things transdisciplinary or specials connecting, and that's important. And I'd also ask you to possibly reflect what's important for you to connect on with and about, and how does what you're putting on that learning wall support and enhance the learning instead of it just being a checkbox approach. And I say this because I was a PYP coordinator and I asked my specialist teachers to do this too. And then I was like, wait, 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 this makes no sense. I'm just doing this because the standard says so. And what's the real meaning? So I'd say, could the specials teachers have their own wall? Like, could it be something that they collaborate together? I know that there's some IB schools who their specials teachers will, do one, let's say on, I'll just say the concept of movement that kind of comes to mind because I think about art, I think about music, and then of course, um, PE as well too. Is there something that they could collaborate on as well? Could the specialist teachers also just build their own? Like, could that be something that, is still connected to the classroom or the homeroom teacher, but also supports the specialist teacher, right? Like our specialist teachers, they don't have so much time with their learners. It's like a 40 or 50-minute block. So what's going to be able to help them get more, or get to those like deeper learning opportunities with their learners as well, too? One other thing I saw an educator do was the homeroom teacher took a photo of their learning wall and then they shared that with the specials teacher, and then the specials teacher just put it on the big screen, but then they zoomed in to one area and they used that as a provocation or to begin to have some classroom discussion. So those are some first things that come to mind, and I don't know how those land for you, or if you're like, no, tell me more. I'm happy to continue the conversation, but those are a couple of things that come to mind and hopefully give you enough to move forward with as well. And if other people have ideas, please throw them here in the chat. You're welcome. Yeah. Yeah. And after today, you want to continue the conversation, just send me a message. I'm always happy to share. Um, I think on either LinkedIn I think on my LinkedIn feed, there's an art teacher who took my Chapters International Learning Wall series and she did one up the staircase just to support her content area. I think she was like, I'm gonna do my own thing. I love you, homeroom teacher, but I also gotta like figure this out for myself too. So yeah, not enough connections. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I also wonder too, like, what is not enough? And when something is new for us, like give yourself a break. It's okay. Um, we'll talk about some of the three essentials in a moment once we shift gears here, whenever you're ready, Becky, and maybe Catherine giving you a strategy to be able to support your goal for next year.
I think it would be good to segue into that, Jess, just
Yeah.
bearing in mind that that was supposed to be our starting point.
All good, all
Already
good.
brilliantly, we've got on a tangent. But I just wanted to share about that's the 360, the classroom 360,
Mhm,
um, about the idea, like Bernard was saying, about making your own one. And like,
mhm,
I just think it would be amazing in a school if
mhm,
teachers all made their own 360 of their
mhm,
classrooms and you use that as an intentional professional learning experience to
mhm,
see who's put what where or why and what can we learn from that. So I
mhm.
just wanted to lift that up.
Yeah, I love
Right,
that.
over to you. So the three essentials for building a learning wall.
Yeah, so if you've not already downloaded or are familiar with the How to Build a Learning Wall sketch, I'd say like this is a really great tool for you to, I'd say lightly use as a checklist, if you will, to kind of walk you through that. I use this, like I said, when I'm doing some support work for some schools. And when I was preparing for today, I was thinking, okay, what are the things that I have to have? Carla, I saw you had answered some of the questions on LinkedIn as well too, and then just kind of reflecting on the last couple of months with some schools. And I'd say, one of the first essentials is what structure are, and Becky, I asked you this as well too, are you going to use for your learning wall to help your learners make sense of what you're displaying? And so a few ideas here. Again, you can be inspired by a lot of the learning walls that are in there, but a few that I see most common, and they're not in any order of importance. So I'd say a timeline is a really great one. Again, if we think about just order and sequence, moving across a timeline is a familiar pattern that if we're looking at historical events or number order, that's very typical pattern and just familiar as well too. So I love a timeline and I'll show you a couple in a moment. A spiral of inquiry is actually inspired by Judy Halbert and Linda Kaiser's work about spirals of inquiry and leadership. And then, of course, just that Indigenous connection as well too. And of course, like, utilizing, some sort of yarn or something to anchor the work, if you will, because it can get a little bit more messy. And then another one, a spider web map. And honestly, this one to me is such a great parallel because if we're asking our learners to do a concept web or brainstorm some of their ideas in writing, this is something that we can just kind of take off the paper, if you will, and use up on our walls. So these are some structures. It's not the only way. And let me show you what some of these can look like and sound like. This one is utilizing a timeline, but you'll notice that there's not necessarily an actual line. What we did in this grade 2 classroom is just cleared off. This was a whiteboard that we ended up covering with paper. Although I don't know if it was necessary, but that's what the teacher chose. Um, and we added artifacts from left all the way to the right. This one is funny because her name is Colleen, and she's like, Jess, I can't believe you share this and it's in your book. But she gave me permission because at the top, can you guys see what her wall is called? Can you see it? Somebody tell me.
I was going to celebrate how many of the learning walls we're seeing, if not all, are not Instagram perfect. So I'm
Mhm.
going to leave it at that.
Yeah, yeah.
Because and
It's
as
a
well,
learn-in wall.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's real.
yeah.
Yeah.
The G fell off the wall. She was calling it a learning wall, and the G fell off, and she just never got back to it. And I just love the authenticity, just like you said, Becky. But again, notice that, we're just attaching things to the wall. They were doing a research process at the very end, they had to create something and do a little bit of writing. And so she really wanted to take her students on that physical journey. So I love that. I've done that with some teachers who teach history and social studies, and that's just kind of something that naturally aligns with how they teach their curriculum. So this is an example of a timeline. I'll show you another one. This is a little bit of an inspiration of the spider web, if you will. This is Beth, you'll recognize this one. This is from an IB coordinator in Sacramento, Natomas. And this particular coordinator was helping her grade levels set goals. And this was her learning wall to support her adult learners or grade levels, if you will. And so it was just, what's your one thing that you're going to focus on this year? And you can see they set some initial goals, and she started to add some artifacts and evidence and just right there up on the wall. Again, there's a lot of space for her to be able to move across this whiteboard. Just because you don't have a whiteboard of a wall doesn't mean you can't do this. I've worked in small spaces as well too, but this is a spider web for you, and I'll just show you one more before I pause. This is a virtual learning wall, so I just wanted to also show physical and those virtual spaces as well too. I know, Becky, you are tinkering with virtual learning walls because of Learning Pioneers, so we've had a lot of conversation. This one belongs to Angela Stockman. She's actually also written a vignette in the publication. She is an educator, author, and teaches at the collegiate level. So I love that she was taking this practice to her adult learners, if you will. And so she's using a little bit of a timeline, if you will, but this highlights, Becky, what you were asking about in regards to colors. So the blue rectangles or squares are just where she plunked those down onto the big whiteboard space and had the students in her class add evidence and document, whether it be, respond to each other. That's what the blue bubbles are. The students had to respond to each other. Um, or she was having them, take some text or take photos of something and throw that on there. So she was using that timeline approach, if you will. And then I'd say also too a little bit of the spider web, because in the very center, her literacy strategy resource guide, that was kind of like the home for the things that she was dropping in that she wanted them to reference and use. So a little bit of those two intermingled, if you will. So a few ways to give your learning walls a structure. And I'll just say a personal caveat before I pause here is, sometimes I think the structure in my mind is going to be the thing that works and what my learners need. And then I change it. And it's okay to change. So there's many times where I've started to build something and then realize it's not really working, or I'm not even able to make sense of it, or I find my students bumbling over it. So I just turf it, move things around, and gosh, it's just such a very Marie Kondo moment, if you will, to refresh and revive a wall.
I'm actually wondering whether that would be a really fun thing to have a learning wall in a certain structure, then pull it off the wall onto the carpet and ask the students how else they would reorganizing it, reorganize it and then reorganize it again to see what they could come up with. I
Mhm.
guess, when they've started to get a bit more au fait with how learning walls work and how they could look, to get their input on that. I was just going to pull in now as well, Job's point earlier on about, I can't remember your exact wording, Job. If you can write the question again in the chat, that'd be amazing. But he was asking about learner attributes and how to pull those into the learning
Mhm.
wall and how to lift those up. And there's been
Mhm.
a couple of references to thinking and I guess those two things go hand in hand because
Mhm.
thinking routines support the development of learner
Mhm.
attributes. So could you go a
Mhm.
little bit more into kind of how
Mhm.
and when you might use those?
Yeah, I'd say, when we're planning a learning wall, we're planning with our curriculum in mind and then also to the disposition. So what are the skills that we want our learners to be able to flex? So if it's, communication skills, how are we planning for that in regards to, placing artifacts, or just like I talked about too, one of the pitfalls is not planning for our learners to be able to engage in that. So, it's almost a little bit of like a split screen as you're planning, like what are those dispositions and how might your learners flex those? um, asking our learners to be able to utilize the wall to reflect on if you're an IB school, the learner profile or the ATL, based on our learning wall, like what's some evidence that shows, you flexing this disposition or shows growth over time. So intentionally utilizing some of that language comes to mind, of course, too. Um, I think that they naturally invite our learners to be able to flex the dispositions if we're using them in the way that they're intended, right? If it's not a display, then it's forcing us to be able to pause and to reflect on the artifacts and evidence and our thinking and how it's changed over time. It's a move that reminds me that makes me think of the disposition of being reflective or being really intentional. I love when educators or I see educators talk about their first thinking and they'll name it on the wall. A lot of early educators will do this as well too. And then they'll go with a different color and add on to their next thinking, right? So I feel like that's a really great way to show that we're honoring that, failure or thinking has changed over time as well. Um, Hopefully that gives you enough to kind of go, or I'm curious too, Becky, other things come to mind.
Yeah, I love that. That's juicy. I was thinking about split screen. I was thinking about that as terms of obviously that kind of comes from Guy Claxton. And just in case anyone's not aware of it, the idea of having a learning intention for your lesson and having a learning intention to stretch a disposition at the same time. But it makes total sense to have that with your learning wall as well, kind of what is the key disposition we're looking to stretch. Um, I've got two follow-ons from that. One is that Job's written the question in the chat, and it was slightly different, but still a good
Ah,
question. So I'll highlight that in a second. But it just sparked something that I was recently in Perth with Marie, and we were going to workshops with James Nottingham, and looking at the learning pit. And I remember this is Marie's question, but I'm just remembering it, Marie, and lifting it up
mm.
now. Whether you've worked with using the learning pit in a learning wall, have you seen that? Have you done that? Because that could be quite interesting and powerful. So it could be a simple no, but just curious.
I have not seen it personally, although I know on both LinkedIn and Instagram, I've seen teachers use it as well too. So, but I have not had my hands or seen up close and personal one of those. But I think that's a really great structure and frame, to think about, similar to a timeline, if you will, but just a different spin on it. But I love that as well too. Yeah, that's a great one.
That'd be interesting. One thing I'll
Hmm.
lift up from that really struck me from my learning power kind of mind was when James talked through how he'd use the learning pit with students and introduce it. And he was saying that point when we're in the learning pit, for anyone who's not familiar with it, basically you're in challenge, you're learning when you're challenging yourself and you're stretching yourself, and you don't know what to do and how to solve the problem, you're in the learning pit. And he was saying it's when you're climbing out of that pit, that's when your learning dispositions are the most important. And he said, when we're all kind of calm and everything's easy, we can be really good at collaborating then. But when learning gets challenging, that's when it's challenging to be a great collaborator. So,
I love
and
that.
Marie's then linked in Learnish, like the language for learning. So it'd be so
Mhm,
interesting to then unpick the kinds of language we're using in the learning pit when
mhm.
we're getting out.
I love
Anyway,
that.
Job's
That's great.
actual question was
It was
what
great.
dispositions and environment culture are essential to have in place to implement
Mm.
a learning wall? So that links to those essential things, and those starting points. Different question. So
Yeah, very
touch on
different.
that.
I mean, I think that we've touched on that a little bit. I'd say, having a curious mindset. Today, I was facilitating a session with a couple of key leaders. It was about 2.5 hours, and we were talking about relationships. And my provocation to them is, what happens when you have a beginner's mindset? And we brainstorm all these ideas. And I said, now, how might you take that when you are, coaching and working with other individuals, adult learners? And they're like, oh gosh, that's so much harder. And so we talked about the idea of like, how might we approach this with a curious mindset? What would happen if, and how might that change that interaction, especially maybe if it's not a conversation that you're looking forward to, or, you're feeling maybe not really invigorated yourself. So I'd say, yeah, having a curious mindset. You've heard me say it or you've said it. I wonder what would happen if. I'd say you also have to be playful. And I know you value play, Becky, and a lot of the other educators here as well too, is how can we be playful with our curriculum and what we're given, if you will, and what we're supposed to teach, and perhaps think about it a little bit differently and what would happen if we moved artifacts or asked our learners to tell us what needs to go where, and just notice the impact that utilizing structures like this, collaborative structures and learning walls, have on our learners too. So I'd say curiosity, for sure, playful mindset. And then of course too, like, you know, that collaboration with peers, having a thought partner alongside you, I think is really helpful for us to process. I know some of us might better work solo, and that's okay too. And also, I feel like having other educators ask us questions help us stretch ourselves into thinking about things a little bit differently, especially when we're kind of getting into those sticky or stretchy zones that don't feel really amazing and quite scratchy. And so, yeah, I think that those would be some key ones. I'm sure there's probably some other in the chat I'm not taking a peek at quite yet. Really, a lot of them that we can connect here too. We have to take risks. Some of you in this room are the only one doing this on your campus, and so you have to have a risk taker mindset. And I'm sure that's not easy. So, who might you lean on to be able to help lift you up when you're not really getting the support that you need on your campus, or maybe on your team, or with administration as well too?
Lovely. I'm so glad that Job asked that question and I
Yeah,
actually
that's
asked the
great.
correct one because
Yes,
that was really
yes,
helpful. And it
yes.
actually the way you presented that and modeled that, it was so empathetic. So I was thinking, that position of, we're as teachers, we're so busy in classrooms, we've got so much pressure on us, there's so much going on. So of course we're going to have our backup sometimes and not feel creative and feel like risk taking or be in a state of
Mhm,
curiosity.
mhm,
So that level of empathy of where teachers might be at and finding that way. Jazan Porfar, who we've interviewed in Learning Pioneers, says empathy, engage, enroll. So connect with
yes.
empathy, engage, and then you can enroll and start something new. And just from a teacher mindset perspective of working with teams, this might be a useful one for people to take away too. We've worked with a coach called James Adu in our advocacy team, and he's brilliant at having really key questions that kind of wake you up and help you kind of pull up your socks. And one of them, he says, is how can I bring the best of myself in the context of everyone else? I think that's such a good question when working in teams because sometimes, sometimes I'm not doing that. Sometimes many people aren't doing that. They're not bringing the best of themselves. They're kind of, just stuck in their kind of own world or their own problems or yeah, butting. And actually, is that bringing the best of yourself? So it
Mhm,
creates that responsibility to not just show up for yourself, but show up for your team in a
mhm,
positive can-do mindset of, taking those risks and trying things. And, even if you're unsure about something, just giving it a
mhm,
go.
mhm,
Yeah, so
mhm,
that's what I kind of thought as you were sharing
mhm, mhm,
that how do we ourselves bring the best of ourselves and how do we warmly encourage those around us and
mhm,
empathize with the
mhm,
situations we're in schools.
mhm. Yeah.
Um, Yeah, so we've got 15 minutes, Jess. It's gone
Mhm.
very, really
Yes,
quickly. And
I
I'd like to
know.
spend a little bit of time because you're working with us in Learning Pioneers
Yep.
between September and December, and
Mhm,
possibly even longer because we've got a really
mhm,
fun plan that I'd like to share with everyone. But
mhm,
is there
mhm.
any kind of last bit? I think we kind of need a
Yeah.
good 5 minutes to dig into that.
Yeah.
Any last
Yeah,
bits?
let me share the last two essentials just because I said there was three and three. This one it's been here on the screen, so some of you might have been like chewing on these questions already. This is a practice that is an essential of having a learning wall, and it seems again quite obvious, but how do you pull up a chair to your learning wall? How do you create routines around the routine to bring your laptop, your curriculum, your thought partners to be able to ask yourself about the evidence? And I know that's a little bit of a nod to that, 5-minute learning wall edit, if you will. But these are just some questions to guide you if you're maybe the only one kind of engaged in this type of a planning process, to be able to pull up that chair. So what could that be routine for you? What does that look like and sound like? So encouraging that to be an essential for you. And then I'll share one last one, and then of course kind of turn it over to you and answer other questions. Another essential when I was doing a little bit of reflecting is we have to have the stuff. If it's in the cupboard or it's down the hallway or it's like in six different places, like we're not going to use it. Like you said, we all know we're very, very busy. And so this kind of came out of just like being frustrated myself of like going to the cabinet and going all these spaces, like make a learning wall bin for yourself. It's not hard. The teacher that I referenced that we did that 20-minute learning wall edit, like this is what we did as we were like grabbing all her things is we just grabbed a bin, threw stuff in there. What might she want her learners to use and have it just ready to go? So, just a little bit of a list here for you. Sentence strips, push pin index cards, Sharpie or smelly markers, if you will, Post-it, staplers, and staples. You can staple things to learning walls. There's still a space for that. Remember the both and more part. Masking tape, if you will, a yarn, of course. You can see a little bit in the background, like how do we show the connection between the artifacts as well too. So a learning wall bin, I'd say, is an essential if you have a physical space, grabbing some things or just noticing whatever it is that you use often. I also love those little circle dots that you see there as well too, to have, students vote, or if you have a tug of war, you can easily kind of utilize that. So I'd say a learning wall bin is an essential. And then Marie is going to throw into the chat a virtual bin, if you will. When I was writing about a learning wall bin, I was like, okay, how do I make sure this is differentiated for all types of educators who are utilizing this? And then also to Becky, knowing our conversations about virtual learning walls. So in the chat, there's a slide deck that you can copy, make a copy of, and use. And it just has little icons, numbers, string, virtual string, if you will. So if you can cut, I mean, you can copy and paste those, you can use that as it is, but just having your own little bin of things. You saw Angela had her own little system. I've seen educators use like Fig Jam and then have like a bin, a virtual bin that has the sticky notes in there so you can just pull it off, if you will. So creating that structure and routine for yourself also invites your learners to be able to engage and just makes it easier for everybody as well too. So there's your three essentials to get going or to make sure that you and your favorite thought partners have alongside you the next time you're building and co-constructing a learning wall.
I love it, Jess. And it makes me just want to be in a classroom. It makes me just want to be like, let's get into this and let's like create something. But well, Learning Pioneers is my virtual classroom. It's
Yes.
thank you so much, Jess. So generous with sharing your
You're welcome.
ideas and
You're
just
welcome.
and everyone in the chat just brilliant. That's a study in itself. So I'll definitely make sure that when I share the recording, I share everything from the chat too. I don't know what Zoom does with photos. Does it share the photos? I'll soon find out. This is the most photos we've ever had in a chat. So brilliant question, Marie, and thank you everyone for your generosity. Do
Mhm.
you want to have a quick look at the chat, Jess, and just kind of see if there's any last bits you'd like to pick out?
Yeah, I think Berna, that's a great suggestion. Like, how can we create systems and structures that make it more easy for teachers to be able to access that? Maybe if you are a school leader here and you're inviting new staff, like, could you put together things and call it a learning wall bin, just as Berna suggests, to, show these things that you value and make it easier for them as well, too. And also, how are you modeling the model as well? Um, yeah, a lot of really amazing photos. Oh, I love that. I'm hoping too that those of you who are finding like, how do I start? I want to do this better. These three essentials and pitfalls give you a little bit to chew on, and of course, help you feel like you can do this too. And then, really encouraging you to continue to share. That's how we all get better. That's how we all get re-inspired, or inspired, if you will. So, I'm gonna have to look at this chat after you share it. But those things definitely stand out to me as some really easy wins, if you will, or some nice starts and shifts. This is great.
And just like that, I mean, I love that people sharing on social media and then
Mhm.
tagging and like hashtagging. And I think it's Mike in the chat if he's still here. I was trying to scroll down to see if
Okay.
you're still here, Mike. But I think
Yeah.
doing a book study of your book that makes absolute sense in a school. To really embed that and to share strategies and ideas is
Mhm.
a really good idea. And
Mhm.
obviously getting the book anyway and sharing that thinking. That's how it's going to just. Often
Mhm.
I find when I'm reading the book studies in Learning Pioneers or your last book, it's just like, that little thing. And then you've got like the kind of
Mhm.
piece that's missing. So
Mhm.
just to wrap things up, shall we just
Mhm.
share with everyone a little bit about the
Mhm.
work we're doing together in Learning Pioneers from September to December? Um,
Yes,
and share
let's
the
do
link
it.
in the chat. So this is
Mhm.
like the first time we're sharing the link. So
Mhm.
kind of world exclusive for you guys, and
Yeah.
I'll share it in the recording too. But shall I describe a little bit what we're doing first, Jess, and then and then you input a
Yeah.
little bit?
Yes, and please don't sign off yet because we have a special giveaway, and so I want you to stay and hear. So yes, go ahead, Becky, go ahead.
Yeah, so in Learning Pioneers, we obviously like to learn and be pioneering. That's in the name. So we're all about, first of all, being inspiring and connected and learning together in community, and then being super intentional and making sure we're using collective efficacy to put those ideas into practice. So we are starting a new experience in September, working with Jess. And the concept is Marie's going to share in the chat the link so that you can look into this in more depth.
Mhm,
We're going to be working with Ron Ritchhart with his book on 10 mindsets for teacher thinking, and it's not the full title, but we're going to be looking at embedding and unpicking his book over 3 or 4 months, and
mhm,
alongside that, visibly documenting our journey as teachers and leaders on the learning
mhm,
boards of our staff rooms, our corridors, so that our school teams are collectively thinking and slowing down our thinking and using thinking routines and really embedding intentionally the ideas from Ron's book. So it's a collaboration with Jess and Ron, which is very exciting. So, Jess, do you want to share some words about that?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I think just really we're using this as an opportunity to model the model and for you to engage in some really amazing learning, of course, with Ron Richart. Also, how is this even real life? Like, I get to do this. Are you kidding me? This is amazing. And to be able to document our practice. So those of you who have kind of shared, okay, how do I start or what do I document? Our hope is that through this authentic documentation, both synchronously and probably asynchronously, you'll get a little bit of a taste of what this looks like and sounds like. I'm hoping to be, really engaged by asking questions and kind of reflecting on, why are artifacts placed here? What is this making you kind of make some connections next? A little bit of kind of the in-between coaching, I'd say, Becky, you and I have done over the last year or so with Learning Walls. And then honestly, I don't think we also know 100% where it's going to go quite yet, which is the kind of exciting part as well, too. So a different way to look at a book study and also embed some other professional development, if you will, on top of already an amazing book. So yeah, I think it's going to be a fun one.
Yeah, it's going to be fun and impactful and transformative. Yeah, so if you're interested in that, Marie's put the link in the chat. We've got a little sign up. It's not available to be part of yet, but if you sign up to that page, well, you'll be the first to know about it.
Mhm,
You'll be the
mhm,
first to be able to sign up. And we're going to keep the
mhm.
group quite small because we
Yeah.
want that kind of shared, intentional,
Mhm,
connected
mhm,
building over time.
mhm,
So yeah, it
mhm,
it is
mhm,
exciting. Thanks for the support, Mike,
mhm.
and thanks, Berner, as well. It's nice to have that reflected back as well.
Yeah.
So Jess, the go on, you were going to say one more
I
thing.
was gonna say, I'm curious if anybody here wanted to sign up like as a school or their own little PLC, would that still be possible? I know you're trying to keep this group small, but is that something possibly if
Yeah,
somebody's interested in to have a small
that's
group?
something I'd recommend.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
for sure.
Yeah,
So we'll
yeah.
we haven't quite figured out the pricing yet, but you can join as an individual. We'll make
Mhm.
it discounted for 3 people, and then we'll give an even bigger discount if you want to
Yeah,
sign up like 10 of
yeah.
your team or something like that.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm. Yeah.
yeah,
And
definitely.
asynchronous and synchronous. So again, time zones. Yeah, we're trying to make it work for everybody. So
All of that. We're
yes.
going to be
Yes.
super intentional,
Yes.
Jess. We're
Yes.
planning it out already to make it really clear
Yes.
as well. So
Yes. Yes.
yeah, and there are lots of people from Learning Pioneers in here. So if you're in Learning Pioneers, you could share in the chat a little bit about your experience so
Mhm,
far in our
mhm, mhm.
community. Whilst Jess shares the giveaway.
Yeah, so lastly, of course, we have the couple of links that I shared with you here, and Marie threw into the chat. We'll make sure those go into an email. But if you made it here today, I'm also going to be giving away a set of books. Just wanting to share the love. So my new publication, Evidence of Inquiry, is why you're all here. So whether you have a copy or not, you can always, if you win, give it to a friend. We're not going to do the poll today. I told Becky, I feel like that's too much pressure, but if you were here today, then your name has been entered to be able to win some books, and you'll get an email from myself and a box of books to be able to share with your favorite critical thought partners and friends. So, yeah, super grateful for all of you to be here. Yeah, yeah, lots of love in this space. So thank you so much, Becky. Thank you, Marie. Thank you for everybody for diving in, sharing your learning walls. Like you are so amazing. It's like I was on my own little learning walk in your space. So it was just really fantastic and fabulous. So please stay in touch. Hopefully, this is not the last that I see each and every single one of you. So yeah, thank you. It's been amazing. Yeah.
And yeah, just so gorgeous. And I'm just going to come back to our intentions because your
Mhm.
intention was love. I'm feeling a lot
Yeah.
of love right now. Mine was
Yeah.
to be stepping into open-mindedness and expansion. And I'm just buzzing
Mhm.
with ideas of
Yeah.
how we can transfer this to our learning walls. And
Mhm.
hopefully the people from Learning Pioneers who are in here can be sharing. We've got a section, Jess, called Pioneers in Practice, where we share our practice. So that's a lovely invitation for everyone to share their learning walls and get feedback in Pioneers in
Yeah.
Practice. Um,
Yes.
yeah, and just a massive thank you to everyone and all of the thinking. And to Marie, thank you so much for co-hosting and sharing links so
Mhm.
beautifully in the chat
Yeah.
and your brilliant idea.
Yeah.
So,
Excellent. Perfect. Well, thank you all. It's so good to see your faces too. So many of you I've seen in person or virtually, and you're here. It's just really great. So have a really great evening, day, afternoon, sleep, wherever you are. Yeah, stay in touch and have a really great one. We'll talk to you all soon.
thanks, Jess. Thanks, everyone. Have a great
Bye,
day.
everyone. Bye.